Tokyo, Japan. Private Dojo, Shinjuku District, April 7, 1971. Tuesday evening, 7:30 p.m. The dojo is older than anyone currently inside it. Not old in the way that buildings in Western cities are old, which is to say structurally aged, showing their years in the weathering of stone and the darkening of brick. Old in the way that certain Japanese spaces are old, which is a different category entirely. Old in the way that means the air inside has been shaped by the specific human activity conducted within the walls for long enough that the space itself has developed a character, a quality of presence that newcomers feel against their skin before they have looked around enough to understand where it comes from. The wooden floors are the color of very old honey. The walls are bare except for two hanging scrolls on the north face. Their calligraphy faded to the precise degree that suggests they have been read 10,000 times and absorbed into the understanding of everyone who trained beneath them until the words are less necessary than they once were. The ceiling beams are dark with age. The smell is cedar and lacquer and the particular clean scent of a space where serious physical work has been done for so long that the work has become part of the building's chemistry. 43 people occupy the periphery of this space tonight, seated formally along the walls in the specific posture that this dojo's tradition requires of observers, a posture that is not merely aesthetic, but functional, that keeps the spine aligned and the attention directed and the body in the state of available readiness that this tradition regards as the appropriate condition for anyone within the walls of a fighting space, participant or witness. Among the 43 are sword masters, not practitioners, not enthusiasts. Masters, in the full technical sense of that word as it operates within the tradition of kenjutsu, the classical Japanese sword art that predates the more widely known kendo by several centuries, and that differs from it in ways that are not superficial. Among them are two men who hold the highest recognized rank in their respective schools, men whose names carry weight in a community where weight is measured in decades of devoted practice and the specific transmission of knowledge from teacher to student across generations. Among them are three martial arts journalists who have been granted access on the condition that they write nothing until both principals have reviewed and approved whatever account they intend to publish. Among them are 6 of Bruce Lee's associates, people from his own training world who are present because what is scheduled to happen tonight falls outside the categories that Bruce's world usually encounters, and their presence was requested by Bruce specifically, because he wanted people there who would understand what they were watching. And among them, seated in the formal position closest to the center of the floor, is Keiko Nakamura's teacher. He is 71 years old, and he has been teaching kenjutsu for 44 years, and before that he was trained for 16 years by his own teacher. And before that his teacher was trained by his teacher, and the chain extends backward in documented, verifiable transmission through 11 generations to a tradition of sword practice that existed before most of the countries currently on the world map had formed their present boundaries. He sits with the stillness of a person for whom stillness is not an achievement, but a default, the settled quality of someone who has spent so many years in meditative and physical practice that the gap between effort and rest has narrowed to the point where both look the same from the outside. He is watching the center of the dojo with the focused patience of a man waiting for something he has been anticipating for a very long time. Keiko Nakamura is 31 years old. She has been training in this dojo since she was 6 years old, which means she has been training in this dojo for 25 years, which means she has spent more of her life inside these walls than outside them, if you measure by the hours that have mattered rather than the hours that have simply passed. She was trained by the man seated against the north wall. She was trained by him exclusively for the first 12 years, and then by him in the primary sense, with supplementary instruction from 2 other masters for the following 13 years. And the result of 25 years of this specific training in this specific tradition is something that the 43 people seated along the walls of this dojo have each encountered in their own ways, and that each of them would describe differently, but that they would all be describing the same thing. She has mastered the sword the way a language is mastered, when a person has thought in it for so long that they no longer translate into it from some other primary language, but dream in it directly. The sword is not a tool she uses. It is an extension of a physical and perceptual system that has been organized around it for 25 years, an extension as natural and as integrated as the arm it extends from. She is 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighs 121 pounds. She carries herself with the compressed quality of someone whose physical mass is entirely purposeful, nothing wasted, nothing decorative. Every line of her body the product of 25 years of a training tradition that values efficiency of form because efficiency of form is the prerequisite for efficiency of function. Her record within the competition structure of classical kenjutsu is not a record in the conventional sense, because classical kenjutsu does not maintain the kind of public competitive records that combat sports maintain. What exists instead is a reputation, built through 2 decades of engagements with other serious practitioners in the closed world of classical sword traditions. A reputation that among the people qualified to assess it is expressed in the specific language those people use for things that have been established beyond reasonable dispute. She has not been defeated in any formal engagement in 11 years. The last person to defeat her was her own teacher in 2009, in a formal engagement conducted as part of a specific stage of her advancement through the tradition's ranking system, in a defeat that was itself a form of transmission, a way of showing her the ceiling of her current development, so she could spend the next years growing toward it. Since then, no one. The story of how Bruce Lee came to be standing in this dojo on the evening of April 7, 1971, begins not with a challenge but with a philosophical disagreement that became a question, that became a proposal, that became, after 3 weeks of careful and sometimes tense negotiation between the people around both figures this evening. The philosophical disagreement originated in an essay. Keiko had written it 6 months earlier at the request of a martial arts journal that served the Japanese classical traditions community. The essay was substantive and serious and argued a position that she had developed over years of thought and practice, which was this: that the classical Japanese sword traditions had arrived at an understanding of combat that was complete in a way that unarmed fighting systems, regardless of their sophistication, could not be complete, because the sword extended the practitioner's perceptual and physical range into a territory that the unarmed body alone could not access. And this extension was not merely physical but philosophical. That the discipline required to master the sword produced a quality of mind that the discipline of unarmed combat, for structural reasons inherent to what unarmed combat was, could not produce in the same way. The essay was translated into English and reached Bruce Lee through his network of contacts in the global martial arts community, people who knew that the things serious practitioners were writing and thinking in traditions he had not encountered in depth were things Bruce would want to know about regardless of whether they confirmed or challenged his own understanding. Bruce read the essay 3 times. Then he wrote a response, not for publication, a personal letter addressed to Keiko directly, sent through the journal that published her essay. The letter was 5 pages, and it engaged with her argument at the level of seriousness the argument deserved. He did not dismiss her position. He did not assert the superiority of unarmed combat as a matter of principle. He argued something more specific, which was that the qualities of mind she attributed to sword training were not exclusive to sword training, but were the product of any sufficiently deep engagement with any sufficiently complete fighting discipline, and that the extension of range she described as unique to the sword was not unique to it, but was a specific expression of a general principle that existed in his own work, and in the work of any practitioner who had gone deep enough into their discipline to find where the discipline's surface ended and its actual content began. He concluded the letter with a question. He asked, "If these qualities are genuine and not system-specific, would you be willing to test that claim directly? Not to prove either of our positions, to find out which of us is closer to the truth." Keiko received the letter, read it, and spent 3 days before responding. Her response was 1 sentence. Name the terms. The terms negotiation took 3 weeks and involved people on both sides who were invested in the outcome for reasons that went beyond either principal's personal stake in the question. The classical kenjutsu community had strong feelings about the framing of any engagement that involved their tradition's weapons against an unarmed opponent, feelings rooted in considerations of both dignity and safety that required careful navigation. Bruce's people had their own concerns, primary among them the obvious one that an engagement involving a sword and an unarmed person presented an asymmetry that no amount of Bruce Lee's skill could make straightforwardly safe. The resolution of these concerns produced a set of terms that took both camps several days to agree on and that all parties signed before any preparation for the evening began. Keiko would use a bokken, a wooden practice sword of the same weight and dimensions as a live blade, capable of delivering strikes that registered genuine impact without the cutting edge that would have made the asymmetry prohibitive. The bokken was not a toy. A serious strike from a bokken, delivered by someone with Keiko's training, produced real force and real consequence. The asymmetry remained significant. It was simply survivable in a way that a live blade would not have been. Bruce would be unarmed, no weapons, no modifications to the basic terms of his own discipline. The engagement would be governed by a single rule. First, clean contact won the exchange. Not the bout. The exchange. 3 exchanges, best of 3. First, clean contact meaning full committed technique, not a touch, not a tap, a technique executed to its conclusion with the quality of a real technique rather than a sparring approximation. The judges of what constituted clean contact would be Keiko's teacher and one of Bruce's senior associates, working together, whose agreement was required before any exchange was scored. The engagement would not be competitive in the sports sense. It would be what both principals had described it to be from the beginning. A test of a philosophical claim, a way of finding out something that could not be found out any other way. Both principals understood this. Both principals accepted it. Now April 7th has arrived, and the 43 witnesses are seated along the walls of the old dojo in Shinjuku, and the 2 people at the center of the space face each other across 12 feet of ancient wooden floor in the light of traditional paper lanterns that one of the dojo's senior students lit an hour before anyone arrived because certain evenings require a certain quality of light, and the overhead fluorescent fixtures that the dojo uses for regular training were not appropriate for this one. Keiko holds the bokken at her right side in the specific resting position of her tradition, which is not a neutral position in the way that a person unfamiliar with the tradition would read it. Every position in classical kenjutsu is a position of readiness. The resting position contains within it the potential for every technique that the tradition encompasses. What it looks like from the outside is stillness. What it is from the inside is the condition of maximum available response. The condition of someone who has organized their entire physical and perceptual system around the single instrument they hold, and who therefore exists in a state of complete information about what that instrument can do, and what it requires, and what it costs, and what it creates. She is wearing the traditional practice uniform of her school, indigo hakama over white gi, the sword held naturally in a grip that is neither tight nor loose, but something the tradition describes as alive, a grip that is a relationship between hand and weapon rather than a holding of one by the other. She looks at Bruce with the evaluative attention of someone who has been thinking about this specific encounter for 3 weeks, and who is now finally receiving the direct sensory information that thinking about it could not provide. Bruce stands opposite her in simple dark training clothes, unarmed in the basic Jeet Kune Do ready position, that is to someone who knows what they are looking at, immediately recognizable as a position of maximum efficiency, nothing wasted, nothing committed, everything available. He looks at her with the same quality of attention he gives everything, not aggressive, not calculating in the nervous sense, reading. The way he was reading in Bangkok, and in North Beach, and in San Francisco, and every other room where he has stood across from someone serious and needed to understand what was in front of him before acting on that understanding. His teacher's teacher's teacher wrote something that Bruce committed to memory early in his training. Before you understand what your opponent will do, you must understand what your opponent is. This is different from predicting technique. It is the understanding that precedes all technique. What is this person's relationship to what they hold? Where does the instrument end and the person begin? Looking at Keiko across 12 feet of ancient floor, Bruce is looking for the place where the bokken ends and she begins. He is not finding it. This is the first information the evening provides him, and it is the most important information because the absence of that boundary, the condition in which a practitioner and their weapon have become so integrated that the separation cannot be located from the outside, tells him something specific about what he is dealing with. He has encountered this condition before in unarmed fighters, the condition of complete integration where the technique and the person are no longer distinguishable from each other at the level of observation. He has worked for years to produce this condition in himself. He has never before encountered it in someone holding a weapon. Keiko's teacher raises his hand. Both principals acknowledge him. He lowers it. The first exchange begins. Nothing happens for 4 seconds that the room can see. This is not accurate. Things are happening that the room cannot see. What the room cannot see is the quality of attention moving between the two people in the center of the space, the specific information being exchanged at a level that is not behavioral in the observable sense, but that is completely real in the sense that matters, because what is being exchanged is the preliminary intelligence that will determine everything that follows. Keiko reads the unarmed opponent in front of her through the framework her tradition provides for reading opponents, a framework that was developed over centuries to read armed opponents, and that she has spent her adult life extending and adapting to read the unarmed ones she encounters in cross-disciplinary contexts. The framework tells her things about weight distribution, about the geometry of potential movement, about where the gaps in his structure are, and what those gaps cost him, and what they offer her. It does not tell her everything. She moves. The approach is not the dramatic, committed charge of a fighter who relies on force. It is the quality of approach that her tradition has refined over centuries for dealing with the fundamental problem of sword fighting, which is that commitment has costs, and the costs of commitment in a discipline where a single clean technique ends everything must be managed with extreme care. She approaches at the speed that allows maximum information gathering while closing the distance that her weapon requires to function at its full capacity. She is 3 steps in when Bruce moves, not away. The room is expecting him to move away. The obvious response to a weapon in the hands of a serious practitioner moving toward you is to create distance, to use the unarmed fighter's mobility advantage to deny the weapon its optimal range. This is the logical response. It is the response that every person in the room is waiting for. He moves toward her. The room's collective nervous system registers this before its collective mind does. People along the walls shift without quite knowing why they are shifting. The 43 people present have enough combined knowledge and experience to understand at the level below conscious analysis what moving toward a sword means in terms of the geometric relationship between weapon and target, what it does to the distance equation, what it does to the timing equation, what it requires the person holding the weapon to do in response, and what that required response costs. Keiko processes his movement. She is good enough that her processing time is very short. She adjusts the technique mid-approach, which requires a quality of adaptability that most practitioners of classical sword traditions have trained themselves away from because the traditions reward committed technique, and the adjustment of committed technique is, in most contexts, a liability. She is not most practitioners. The adjustment arrives in time. The Balkan strikes. It makes contact with Bruce's left forearm. The contact is real. It has the force of a serious technique behind it. Bruce pulls the arm partially back before the full commitment lands, and the result is a strike that has a portion of its intended force rather than all of it, but that meets the definition of clean contact, as both judges understood it when they agreed to the terms. The exchange is scored for Keiko. The room releases a breath it has been holding for approximately 6 seconds. Bruce steps back. He looks at his forearm. There will be a bruise there by morning. He nods once, the nod of a person receiving information they needed without prejudice about whether that information is comfortable. He looks at Keiko. She is back at her starting distance, back in the resting position that is not neutral, back in the condition of everything available. Her expression has not changed from the expression it carried before the exchange. She is processing what she learned. What she learned is this: he moved toward the sword, not randomly, not desperately, not out of a miscalculation about distance. He moved toward it with the specific intentionality of someone who had identified that moving toward a sword changes the geometric relationship between the sword's optimal range and the target in a way that if the approach were slightly faster or the adjustment of the technique slightly slower would have produced a different result. He was testing the boundary. He found it 1 centimeter closer than he reached. She knows now that he will be 1 centimeter closer in the second exchange. The second exchange begins. He is 1 centimeter closer. The technique that Keiko launches in the second exchange is not the technique she launched in the first. She has revised the revision accounts for the 1 centimeter. The revised technique covers the geometry that the additional centimeter creates, arrives along a path that the additional centimeter does not protect. Bruce is not 1 centimeter closer in the second exchange. He is 2 centimeters closer, and he is not moving in a straight line. The room cannot track what happens in the next 2 seconds with the precision required to describe it accurately. What the room can track is that the Bakan's technique does not land cleanly, and that Bruce's right hand makes contact with Keiko's leading wrist in a manner that is not a strike in the conventional sense, but that addresses the mechanical relationship between the hand holding the weapon and the weapon being held, that finds in that relationship the specific point of structural vulnerability that exists not in the sword and not in the person, but in the living connection between them. The Bakan does not fall. Keiko's grip is too developed for that, but the technique it was executing does not complete. The geometry of its path has been altered at the source. It arrives at a point that is not where a clean technique ends. The judges confer. They take slightly longer than the first exchange required. Then they score the second exchange for Bruce. The room is loud for a moment, then quiet again. The quality of the quiet is different from the quality of the quiet during the exchanges. It is the quiet of people who have understood something that will take them some time to fully articulate, but that has registered completely at the level below articulation. Keiko's teacher, seated against the north wall, has not moved and has not changed his expression. He is watching his student in the center of the floor with the attention of someone who taught her everything she knows and who has just seen her encounter the boundary of what everything she knows covers. The third exchange. This is the exchange that the 43 witnesses will discuss for years. Not because it is spectacular in the visible sense. It is not the most visually dramatic sequence of the evening. It is the one that contains the most information about both people, information that does not fully reveal itself until you have spent time with it after the fact, turning it over, applying your understanding to it from different angles. Keiko enters the third exchange with something that the people along the walls who know her best will afterward describe as completeness. The adaptations of the first two exchanges have been integrated. The revision of the second exchange from the first and the revision of the third from the second represent in compressed form the same process that has produced her record over 11 years. The process of taking in what a specific encounter teaches and incorporating it immediately without the delay that less serious practitioners experience between learning and application. She is bringing everything in the third exchange, not in the sense of maximum force, in the sense of maximum integration. Every adaptation available to her from what the first two exchanges taught her, organized into an approach that addresses the two things she now knows about him. He moves toward the sword, and he finds the connection point between the practitioner and the weapon. She addresses both, simultaneously. Bruce is watching. He sees her bring everything. He has been watching her bring more with each exchange, and he understands what it means that she is now bringing everything, because he has spent his life in rooms with serious people, and the quality of a serious person bringing everything has a specific, recognizable character that he has learned to read the way a musician reads a specific chord. He brings everything too. The third exchange lasts less than 3 seconds and contains within those 3 seconds more technical density than most fights contain in their entirety. Both principles are operating at the absolute limit of what their respective systems have developed in them. Keiko's sword is moving at the speed that 25 years of this specific training produces, along paths that centuries of refinement have identified as the paths that are geometrically most efficient for the specific problem of arriving at a target that is trying not to be arrived at. Bruce's unarmed body is moving at the speed and with the precision that 30 years of his specific training produces, finding within the available space and the available time, the positions, and the contacts that address the mechanical realities of what a sword held by a serious practitioner can and cannot do. The judges stop the exchange. They confer. The conference takes longer than either of the previous two. Both judges are applying the agreed definition of clean contact to what they observed, and finding that the application requires more care than the previous exchanges required because the third exchange did not produce the clarity of outcome that the first and second exchanges produced. What the judges finally agree on is this: Keiko's technique landed. It landed with sufficient commitment and sufficient accuracy to constitute a clean contact by the terms of the agreement. The contact was on Bruce's upper chest, slightly left of center. It was real. It had force behind it. Bruce's response landed also. In the fraction of a second after Keiko's technique arrived, his left hand found the specific point on her sword arm, the junction of the forearm and the wrist, where the control of the weapon is most mechanically concentrated, and applied to it a force that was not sufficient to break the connection, but that was sufficient to disrupt the full completion of the technique that was already in motion. The technique that landed was slightly compromised, not by enough to deny it. Compromised. The question before the two judges is which of these facts governs the scoring of the third exchange. They take 11 minutes. Then they agree. The third exchange is Keiko's. Her technique landed. His response addressed the completion of the technique, but could not undo the contact that preceded the response. The series is 2-1, Keiko's favor. The room receives this verdict with the measured response of people who have watched something too complex for simple partisan reaction. There is no triumph on Keiko's side of the room. There is no disappointment on Bruce's side. There is the particular atmosphere that gathers when something has happened that everyone present will need time to fully understand, and when everyone present knows that they will need that time. Both principals stand in the center of the floor. Keiko bows first, a full formal bow of the kind her tradition uses to acknowledge an encounter of significance, not a bow of victory, a bow of recognition. Bruce bows in return, with the depth and the completeness that the moment warrants. They approach each other. Keiko speaks first. In Japanese, which Prasong is not present to translate, but which one of Bruce's associates who has been living in Japan for 3 years renders quietly for the people nearby. She says, "In 25 years, I have not encountered someone who could find the connection point. I did not know it was findable from the outside. I will spend a long time thinking about the third exchange." Bruce says, in the careful Japanese he has been developing through his time in the country, "Your adaptation between exchanges is the most complete I have encountered. The revision from the first to the second was faster than I expected. The revision from the second to the third was faster than I thought possible. I learned more in 3 exchanges tonight than I have learned in some years of training," she says. "The essay I wrote was not wrong, but it was incomplete. What you showed me tonight is that the qualities I attributed to sword training are not exclusive to it. They can arrive through different paths. I knew this was possible, theoretically. I did not know what it looked like until tonight," he says, "and what I knew theoretically about the integration of weapon and practitioner, I understood only partially until I stood across from you and could not find where one ended and the other began. That is something I will carry back with me and work toward in my own practice for a long time." They stand in the center of the old dojo in Shinjuku with the 43 witnesses seated along the walls in the light of paper lanterns. 2 people who came to a philosophical question by different paths and met it in the center and found that the center was larger than either of them had mapped from their respective positions. Keiko's teacher rises from his formal seated position. He crosses the floor, which he has not done all evening. He stops before both of them. He looks at Keiko for a long moment. Then he looks at Bruce for a long moment. Then he says something in Japanese that his student later tells Bruce's associate means approximately this: "The encounter reveals the shape of what remains." He bows to both of them, returns to his seat. The dojo is silent. Then slowly, one by one, all 43 people along the walls bow in the direction of the center of the floor. Some of them are bowing to Keiko. Some of them are bowing to Bruce. All of them are bowing to what happened between them in the space of 3 exchanges on the ancient wooden floor, to the thing that needed both of them to exist and that neither of them could have produced alone. Bruce Lee left Tokyo the following week. He carried the bruise on his forearm for 10 days, long enough that he was still looking at it when he sat down to write in his training notebook. The things that the evening in Shinjuku had added to his understanding. The things that 25 years of classical Japanese sword training carried in one person's body had shown him about the outer limit of his own map. He wrote for a long time. The last line he wrote that night was this: "The boundary of what I know is the most useful thing I found tonight. Not because I want to remain at the boundary, because now I know exactly where to go next." He closed the notebook. He went to sleep. In the morning he trained. He was always training. That was the point. That was always the point.